Back in February of 1959, 9 really experienced hikers went on an expedition into the Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union, but they never came back. What search parties eventually found at their last campsite has become, without a doubt, one of the most chilling and just baffling unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. And the official investigation? Well, that only made things even more confusing.
This right here, this is the cold, official conclusion from the investigation. Unknown circumstances. Just 2 words, but those 2 words are doing a lot of work, trying to cover up a mountain of bizarre, contradictory, and frankly terrifying evidence. This is where we begin, with this grim official statement that tells us almost nothing. So before we can even start talking about theories, aliens, secret weapons, you name it, we have to get a handle on what the search party actually found. Because the evidence on that frozen mountainside, it doesn't just raise questions, it seems to completely defy all logic. Okay, just look at this list. Every single clue seems to contradict the one before it. These are expert hikers, right? But they slice their tent open from the inside, a clear sign of pure panic, and run out into 30 below zero weather, some of them with no shoes on. But here's the kicker. There were no signs of anyone else, no struggle, and it gets weirder. Some had internal injuries you'd get from a high-speed car crash, but no bruises, no cuts, nothing on the outside. Then you throw in radioactive contamination on their clothes and some truly horrific injuries. It's like a puzzle where all the pieces are from different boxes. Any theory that's going to work has to explain all of this. I mean, that's the real question, isn't it? What on earth could have terrified them so badly that running barefoot into a Siberian blizzard seemed like the safer choice? It's just mind-boggling. So let's start by looking at some of the more, well, conventional explanations. All right, so now we're going to dive into the most common theories that have been thrown around over the decades. We'll start with the official one, and then we'll break down exactly why, for so many people, it just doesn't hold up.
Okay, so the first, and for a very long time, the official explanation was an avalanche. And, on the surface, it kind of makes sense. It would explain why they cut their way out in a panic, and it could explain those awful internal injuries. But the evidence on the ground just tells a totally different story. The tent was on a pretty gentle slope, not exactly avalanche country. And here's the big one. The tent wasn't even buried, and their footprints leading away from it were still perfectly visible in the snow. An avalanche would have wiped all of that away. So what about the fact that some of them were barely dressed in that insane cold? Well, medical experts have a term for this: paradoxical undressing. It's a real thing that happens when someone is in the absolute final stages of freezing to death. They get delirious and feel like they're burning up, so they take their clothes off. The problem here is the timeline. All the evidence suggests they were already undressed when they fled the tent, way before they would have been in the final stages of hypothermia. Plus, after they ran, they did rational things. They built a fire, they tried to get a better view from a tree, they even took clothes from their friends who had already died to try and stay warm. Those aren't the actions of people who are out of their minds. Well, if it wasn't a natural event, maybe it was a human one? A secret Soviet weapons test? Now that's a theory with some teeth. An experimental bomb could definitely explain the crushing injuries and maybe even the radiation. But this theory has its own problems. You'd think if this was a top-secret military operation gone wrong, they locked the area down tight. But they didn't. They let civilian search parties right in. And a weapon that powerful would have left signs. A crater, shrapnel, something. But the scene was found to be almost completely undisturbed. So with all the conventional theories hitting a wall, the investigation, both the official one and the amateur ones that followed, started looking at, well, more extraordinary possibilities. And this is where the story gets really, really weird. Because years later, the lead investigator himself admitted that he was told to ignore evidence of something truly out of the ordinary. Now, this question comes from another hiker who was in the same area around the same time. Decades later, he described seeing a strange light in the sky, and he claimed this light seemed to get aggressive whenever he looked directly at it, but it would calm down if he looked away. And that idea forms the basis for a very specific and fascinating UFO theory. This whole theory is built on a really terrifying concept. Think about it. If that hiker was right, one person can just look away and de-escalate the situation. But with 9 people in a group, the chances are almost 100% that someone is always looking at it. And that could create this horrible feedback loop of ever-increasing intimidation, forcing them out of the tent. It also gives us a possible answer to that huge question.
Why didn't they just go back for their warm clothes and gear? Maybe they couldn't. Maybe the object just stayed there, guarding the tent. And here it is, the bombshell. Decades after the case was officially closed, the original lead investigator, a man named Lev Ivanov, came out and said the real cause was fireballs or UFOs. He said he saw burn marks on trees that weren't from a normal campfire. He believed a completely unknown energy was aimed selectively at the hikers. I mean, that's a jaw-dropping admission from the guy who was in charge of the whole thing. But what if the answer wasn't from up in the sky, but was actually all around them? There's a powerful natural phenomenon that's both invisible and silent, but it's known to have seriously strange effects on the human mind and body. This theory suggests the killer wasn't an alien or a weapon, but a sound. This phenomenon is called infrasound. It's basically a super low-frequency sound, so low that our ears can't hear it, but our bodies can absolutely feel it. And it's generated by all sorts of things in nature, including very specific wind patterns that happen over mountains, something called a Kármán vortex street, which could easily have been happening right there at Dyatlov Pass. So how can a sound cause so much terror? Well, check out this story about a scientist named Vic Tandy. He was working late in his lab, a lab that was supposedly haunted. He suddenly felt this overwhelming sense of dread and saw a gray figure out of the corner of his eye. It turns out, a new fan in the lab was putting out a silent sound wave at around 19 hertz. And what do you know? That's the resonant frequency of the human eyeball. The sound was literally vibrating his eyeballs, creating an optical illusion. He wasn't seeing a ghost. He was experiencing infrasound. Okay, so now let's apply this to the Dyatlov incidents. Intense, naturally created infrasound could absolutely explain this sudden, irrational panic that made them flee. It can cause feelings of pure dread, nausea, even those visual distortions that could have made them think they were seeing something terrifying. This invisible pressure could be the compelling force that drove them from their only shelter. Now, it doesn't really explain the massive physical injuries, but it provides a really powerful scientific explanation for that initial panicked flight. So we have an avalanche, a secret weapon, a UFO, and a ghost frequency. 4 completely different theories, all trying to make sense of one incredibly bizarre event. But what if the Dyatlov Pass incident wasn't a one-of-a-kind thing? Just take a look at this. This is the Gaume incident, which happened in 1993, also in Russia. 6 hikers died, but there was 1 survivor. And her story is absolutely horrifying. She said the victims were convulsing, bleeding from their eyes and ears, frothing at the mouth, even clawing at their own throats. And again, we see the partial undressing and irrational behavior. And guess what the official cause of death was? Simple hypothermia. The similarities are they're undeniable, and they are deeply, deeply creepy. So, after more than 60 years, where does that leave us? With a bunch of really compelling but ultimately incomplete theories. Natural events, secret technology, otherworldly encounters, they're all still on the table. Each theory is like a key that can unlock 1 or 2 parts of this mystery, but not a single one can open all the doors. The Dyatlov Pass mystery endures because every answer we come up with just seems to shatter when you hold it up against all the facts. So what do you think happened? Was this just a tragic, perfect storm of natural events, like a small avalanche combined with infrasound? Was it a Cold War secret that was brutally and efficiently covered up? Or were those 9 hikers the victims of something that, even today, we just don't have a name for? The answer is still out there, somewhere on that silent, frozen mountainside.